Good evening, everybody, and welcome, Pariyagak. We're very excited about this evening's Lavash event. This is the Armenian Institute, and we are hosting an event called Lavash, the bread that launched 1,000 meals. And it's from the cookbook written by Ara Zada, Kate Leahy, and John Lee. And I've already tried their lavash twice now, and it actually is delicious. Really, really great and not very difficult. So start out with a recommendation there. Let me just say that if we are recording tonight, so if anybody doesn't want to be seen on the recording, please go down into somewhere on your screen, you will be able to find a place where you can block your screen, and it will just be black. Otherwise, it's great to see all these faces, so do please leave your face there if you can. We will be sharing things in the chat line. I see it's quite full already. And we invite you to put questions there while it's going on. And Ed, whom I'll introduce in a minute, will be scanning that and passing your questions on to our cooks. And we will also be helping him with that. So do watch it to put your own questions there, but also watch it for different things like links. For example, we'll put the link to the book, Lavash, there, and another book that they'll tell you about called Artsakh. We'll also have personal links for Kate and for Ara and for Ed. You can look at their cooking sites and ask them questions later on. So there's going to be a lot going on in the chat line. I'd also like to first thank my tech team, which is Datavik Ivazian and Nick Mateo, the director of AI and the program managers. So we've got an all-star team there. And Stephen Masters, I saw somewhere, who's always helping us with one of our trustees helping with the tech. I think that's it for me for now. Just to say that we're all on mute, and obviously not me right now, but I will be soon. And if you want to put your hand up, there's a blue hand that's also available on your screen somewhere you can use, or you can just write your question in the line and chat line and tell us if you want to say it yourself, then we can unmute you. And otherwise, Ed will read your questions out. I'm going to turn over now to Ed Istanbulyan. And Ed has already here he is on our screen. Ed gave us a talk back last September. I think, Ed, was it the day before the Artsakh war began? It was something like that. Terrible.
Very closely, yes.
Yeah. But fortunately, we didn't know what was going to be happening the next day. And we had a fabulous evening with him teaching us how to make a special version of dolma, or sarma, as I would call it. And it was delicious. I know everybody who was there really enjoyed it. Ed is actually a theater director and a comedy director, but he has created a fabulous cooking site. And we'll put that up in the chat line as well, so you can see what he does. Not just Armenian food, he does all kinds of stuff. So, but Ed has known Kate and Ara for some time, and he will be chatting with them and passing on your questions. And then I'll see you all at the end. So Ed, over to you.
Thank you, Susan. I think we should spotlight Kate and Ara now, because I'm just about to talk about them. So there we go. There's Ara.
Sweet.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Kate as well. There we go.
There.
Hi, guys. First of all, I just want to say that it's a real pleasure to be invited by the Armenian Institute to introduce today. I'm going to speak very briefly and then hand over to Kate and Ara, who have all sorts in store for us. But as I said, it's a real pleasure to introduce the two speakers. Together, they make up 2/3 of the team who put together one of the most beautiful cookbooks of the last few years. Lavash, the bread that launched 1,000 meals. I have my copy here. It's not just a cookbook. It is a window into 21st century Armenia. It is stuffed full of the most beautiful photography, stories, essays, classic Armenian characters, and a tantalizing range of recipes. From the eponymous Lavash bread to lamaho, Jingalov hats, matnakash, from cured bastamar and dolmades to each, horovats, sujuk and spas, and I apologise for my pronunciation of all of those words.
That's good. You're doing good.
Ara says I'm doing good. Personally, as an Armenian and as a foodie, the book has brought me closer to my roots through cooking and introduced me to a wide range of dishes that I'd never experienced. Not only that, but it's attempting to answer the big question of what truly is Armenian food. So we're really lucky to have Kate and Ara with us today. Kate Leahy is a journalist and food writer based in San Francisco. Kate learned to cook while working in restaurants in Boston, San Francisco and Napa before attending Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism. As well as Lavash, her books include Burma Superstar, a cookbook about an American Burmese restaurant in San Francisco, and La Bouvette, which was published this year and tells the story of a small independent food and wine shop in Paris. Kate also, critically, wrote her undergraduate thesis on Armenian food and cultural identity, so she is an expert. Alongside Kate, we have Ara Zada. Ara is an LA-based chef, food stylist and writer. He grew up in an Armenian-Egyptian household in Southern California, where he spent a lot of his youth in the kitchen, cooking and eating, earning him the nickname Kol Kol from his grandfather, which in Arabic is...
Eat.
It sounds like you had a very similar childhood to mine, Ara.
Yeah, I'm sure.
He trained as a chef at Le Cordon Bleu, and since then has worked as a food stylist for ABC, CBS, the Food Network, and our very own Jamie Oliver. He also works developing recipes for hotels and supermarket chains across the States. So a very brief introduction. I'm going to hand over to Kate and Ara now, who are going to tell us a little bit about their journey to writing Lavash, and I believe are going to treat us to a couple of cooking demonstrations along the way. As Susan said at the start, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask as we go along, please don't hesitate to type them into the chat, and I will try as much as possible to feed them in as we go. Or if you prefer, we can spotlight you and you can ask the question in person. So without further ado, please welcome Kate and Ara.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, what a warm welcome. I
like it.
I don't know if we can follow up that act, so we'll do our best. But just a brief talk about how, because what we want to do today is we want to show you two dishes from the book. Ara is going to be making a trout wrapped in lavash with tarragon. There's the trout. And I'm going to be doing Jingalov, the famous bread from Artsakh. And those are some of the herbs I'll be chopping. But before we get started, you might be wondering how someone like me and someone like Ara came together with our third co-author, John Lee, to write a book focused on Armenia. I mean, clearly, John now lives in Singapore, but he's a Californian, Ara's a Californian, and I'm a Californian. So it's not the most obvious of, like, we're going to go to a small country of 3 million people and write about their food. But the reason we got into it, and Ara, don't worry, I'm going to give the short answer so you can get into
Oh no, you're good. You're good. We're doing good.
So what happened was John and I were actually working on the Burma Superstar cookbook together. We were traveling in Myanmar, fortunately long before the current situation there, and we had a lot of extra time on our hands. Ironically, John had just flown back from Armenia. He taught a 3-week workshop in Armenia to high school students. It was a food photography workshop through TUMO, an organization that many of you might be familiar with, for basically giving students this amazing after-school education. And so John went around the entire country. He's a photojournalist by trade, and he captured all these amazing images. So he's showing me these images, and I'm thinking, this is really something special. It was just something, we needed to make something happen with it. And I knew that I was interested in figuring out the food aspect, as Ed mentioned. When I was in undergrad, I actually did write a thesis called, it was Feeding Nostalgia. It was all about food and Armenian American identity, and whether food was a way to really express and save culture. It was 20 years ago. People weren't as excited about food. There was no Food Network at that point. Not as much. I don't think Jamie Oliver had come on the scene yet. So food wasn't as sort of media focused as it was then. And it was really about thinking about, does the food you eat really kind of identify you in some way? And I thought for Armenians it really did. So when John was thinking, I had the most amazing trip to Armenia and I ate the best food ever, I thought, well, there's a book there. We needed another person to round out our trio, our team. So through the network of the TUMO network, we found Ara, who had also taught a workshop in Armenia, teaching, I guess, like kind of cooking classes there, right, Ara?
Yeah. So I was asked to go to TUMO, go to Armenia, and teach students a modern twist or an appetizer version of traditional Armenian dishes. And I grew up as an Armenian American or Egyptian Armenian. My mom was born in Egypt. So my food game in Armenian cooking was a little bit different than the first time I went to Armenia. And I didn't go to Armenia as a kid. We used to do this talk, it was like 5 years ago, but now I guess it's like 8 years ago was the first time I went to Armenia. And I was kind of blown away because I didn't know a lot of the dishes. I didn't recognize them. I grew up with kind of that Middle Eastern flair, and I just thought everything I was eating was Armenian. So going to Armenia for the first time was a big kind of culture shock in the food world because they didn't have some of my favorite things, which I thought were just the staples. So when I met Kate and John and they had the idea of making the book, they brought me along and said, hey, like, we want to do an Armenian cookbook. And we said, okay, this is great. We started kicking around some recipes. We started figuring some things out, and we had an idea. You go, what are we going to call this book? And we're like, it's going to be Armenia, the cookbook. Yeah, it was going to be magnificent. It was going to be 6,000 pages. We would get yelled at by every Armenian in the world. Like, that's not how you make it, and that's not how you make it. It would take us like 10 years to write. We decided that's probably not the right angle. So we said, let's, instead of getting recipes from the people that we know, the local Armenians and things like that, let's go to Armenia, go village to village, and travel through and gather the recipes from Armenia specifically. So it's kind of like a timepiece. It's recipes and meals that have been cooked in Armenia, that are currently being cooked in Armenia, that have been cooked there for hundreds of years. And that way, if we went and we found a dolma recipe in the middle of Armenia, somebody would be like, that's not how you make dolma. That's not how my grandma makes it. So that's not the real dolma, which every Armenian on the planet is like that. Their mom makes the best food and everyone else is wrong. And I mean, we've been through it. It's fine. But this is just versions of things we found traveling through Armenia. And nobody can really argue the fact that it's Armenian or not, because we walked through like a village or the people haven't really left. And then this is what they're cooking.
Well, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that were so surprising to you that you found, like, for example, spices, lemon juice, olive oil. What kind of things did you miss when you first got there?
Yeah, so we grew up at, obviously, Western Armenian. We're talking about Eastern Armenian versus Western. People in Hayastan or Armenia, that's Eastern Armenian is what they call them. We're used as Westerners, it's like lemon on everything. Like, if you grow a lemon tree, that's like growing money out here as an Armenian. But in Armenia, there's no lemon. Like, they don't really use a lot of lemon. The lemons come from Iran and they're quite expensive. So for acid, they use apple cider vinegar, which most of the time they make themselves at home. So that's their acid. Spice-wise, we were used to a lot of we still are, a lot of Middle Eastern spices, things like sumac or things that are like a little more spicy, or just cumin, coriander, all this stuff. And in Armenia, it's a lot more simple. You highlight the meat, you highlight the grains. It's really salt and paprika and pepper. That's kind of the baseline. They call it garmir biber, which is just red pepper, which is just paprika. So in salt on everything, and there isn't really a mishmash of crazy spices. Everything is just blasted with herbs. So,
well, like, you're going to demonstrate, right? Because I mean,
exactly.
We learned it was with Armenian food, what really made it stand out. Like, we traveled there in the summer, in the fall, and in the spring. And what really stood out was just the fresh herbs. Like, the herbs there taste better than I think anywhere else I've ever had herbs, like, on everything.
Exactly. And one of the most beautiful things about Armenia is just the sheer hospitality. And that's one of the things when I talked to Kate. Kate had never been there. And she's kind of like, hey, and John had been there, so he knows the drill. But Kate's like, how are we going to gather these recipes for this book? Like, what are we just going to knock on people's doors? And that's exactly what you do. Because in Armenia, you could walk into a village, and then all of a sudden, you are their best friend. They will invite you in for dinner. They'll make you sleep at their house. They'll give you all their trade secrets. And these aren't like, they're not affluent like villages. These are villages with people that don't have a lot of money, but you walk into the door and they will put out everything they own for you. So we walked to restaurants, or we walked to houses, and we said, you know, what's your family's secret recipe? And they were like, here you go. And then they made it for us, and they handed it over. And I mean, there were some challenges. I mean, Kate and I are pretty trained with these things. So like, you know, they would be like, oh yeah, you know, did you add salt in there? Like, they're like, of course I added salt. Well, we didn't see it, you know, like, or how much is this and how much is that? And everything is just like, they say achki chop, which means by the eye. So you're like, oh, how much water did you put in there? They're like, achki chop, like by the eye. Like, what are you, stupid? Just figure it out.
It's that idea that everyone there, well, especially the women, know how to cook. So when you ask sort of questions, they didn't think they needed to explain that to you because they already assumed everyone knows that. So it's like,
exactly.
What did you add vinegar to this? And oh, of course, you know, that was always the answer. Do salt? Of course.
Of course, it's almost like they did it behind their back and we didn't see. But they're like, of course I did. Naturally, that just doesn't make. And of course, why wouldn't you? They were also really enamored with the fact that I was a male in the kitchen, so that would get a lot of like credit. They'd be like, "Oh, and cut something! This is so exciting! Like there's a boy cooking."
You got to chop a lot of vegetables. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to chop a lot. They love my chopping skills. But that will lead us into one of my favorite recipes from Armenia that I had no idea about until I traveled to Armenia, and that's Lavash-wrapped trout. And we first heard about this recipe. It's very famous near Sevan, and Sevan is basically the largest body of water in Armenia. It's like an ocean, but not really. And it's a very, very, very simple dish, and we'll walk through it because you can make this extremely fast. You don't need many ingredients. So butter, that God me to be better we were talking about, salt, tarragon, which tarhum, this is just, everybody loves tarragon in Armenia. It goes in everything. And then this is a white trout. You can do this with any other trout. They use ishkhan, is what they call trout, specifically from Sevan. You can do a rainbow trout. I've done this with red snapper. I've done it with bronzino. Any sort of like long white fish that's fairly thin. You don't want something super fat. But you can do it. We've done it with salmon fillets. We've had that in Montreal. So I'm going to get started.
Ed, quick question for you. What fish would you be able to get in London?
That's a great
question. I was worried you were going to ask me a question about cooking, Kate, and you did almost immediately. Trout. We could get trout.
Yep.
Yeah, this is a trout recipe. Trout is pretty common. Does anyone else want to help me here?
Do you get Arctic char at all? Is that a fish that you find? That might be one that we just get out here. I did make it with that too, and it's a pink. It's almost like a kind of a rainbow trout, pink sort of a cross between a trout and a salmon almost.
Mm-hmm. All right, so here we go. You got your trout, and I just basically took all the fins off, right? Now, take a cleaver. Now, if your trout's big, if it's huge, you can cut it into 3. You can do the whole trout if you want. I'm just gonna cut it in half. So we got 2 pieces of beautiful trout, right? This is the fun part. So put that up here. We get our awesome lavash here. And we're very fortunate here in LA that I can just kind of go anywhere and get lavash. Any Armenian store, which we have a ton. We just put on our Instagram, I walked through one of our local stores, Super King, and there's like 200 varieties.
Yeah.
So,
Ara, I was just looking at that video earlier and thinking that we might run into this problem. Now, there might be Armenians in the chat who disagree with me here, but I found it quite hard to find lavash in London, which is why the book has been so great. We've been able to make our own. Have you got any suggestions for, other than make your own, for anyone that can't get hold of lavash?
So this is a very common thing, and I've seen it in a lot of UK books. They put a tortilla instead of lavash. It's not the same. It just isn't the same. It's completely different. It's a flatbread. I love tortillas. I love Mexican food, you know, but the consistency, the texture of lavash is completely different. If you found like a naan bread that was like super thin, you could possibly do it.
Another thing too is if you don't feel like going through the whole process of making lavash from the book, you can make the dough from the Jingalov that I'm going to show you when the trout is in the oven. And this dough is really simple. It's salt, flour, water. You can make it in 20 minutes, roll it out and griddle it. And I mean, it might be a little less pliable than lavash that you'd buy, but it can do in a pinch too. If you just really just need to make that lavash-wrapped trout happen and you didn't have time to hunt some down. So.
Well, we've got lots of people in the chat saying that lavash is available absolutely everywhere in London. So I've been schooled. There is Arabic shops in Shepherd's Bush, Ridley Road Market, North End Road in Fulham, all over the place. Thank you for all of the recommendations.
Right. So I'll walk you through this. You don't know if you guys just saw what I just did. Super simple. Trout, you get some salt, all inside, all around. You get your red pepper, gourmet bibed, paprika, whatever you want to call it. If you want it a little spicier, you can kick it up a little bit with cayenne or a different kind of spice. This is done with tarragon, but I've also done it with cilantro or coriander. I've done it with any kind of herb. You stuff it in there. You add a big fat pat of butter. I know it seems insane, but it's awesome. And then what you do is you pull it up. What's up?
So that butter, it's like a nice sizable chunk, right?
Exactly. So you lift it up, you tuck in, and then you roll it over, and you keep. It's kind of like a nice little burrito, right? And then I got it here on a rack, and I've already melted some butter here, okay? And this is gonna help with the browning. So you just kind of see that. So you put this on the top. Super easy. And then I have my oven preheated to 400. I think it's at 400, maybe 425. And
hot oven.
We go bye-bye. And we're gonna see that in about 15 minutes and it's gonna be done.
And Ara, while we're on lavash and things that you can put in lavash, I've heard you tell stories about two particularly interesting sounding sandwiches that you had in Armenia with potato and also with burnt lavash. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
So yeah, I mean, it was our first experience or second, I don't remember, we've been there so many times now, but Kate and I are with our favorite lavash makers, and basically, it's in this place called Lusakert, and it's a little bit north of Yerevan. And it's just it almost looks like a garage. There are these ladies in there, and they make, in our opinion, we might get scolded, the best lavash in Armenia. And that's heavy. I know, but it's amazing. And we've been there several times. And this time we were hanging out with them, and they just stay up, and it was break time. So they get up, and they pull out, they have their lavash freshly baked, all chillin', and then she pulls out basically this tub of freshly boiled potatoes and pickles. And we're like, okay, and she's like, she takes a little piece of potato, wraps it up with some burnt crispy lavash on the outside and inside, and then she hands it to us, and Kate and I are like, potato sandwich. This is so not California and LA. We're like, this is carb overload. This isn't actually what we should be. We both took a bite with this spicy pickle, and we were like, what? This is insane. Maybe the best sandwich we've ever had. And it was crazy.
It was so good. I don't think I've ever had a potato taste that good without any kind of, it was just salt on the potato, but it tasted like it had been like cooked in butter because it was just that rich. And then the crispiness of the lavash, just like, and the smokiness of it, it just all kind of worked together. So one day we're going to have to figure out how to replicate that. But so
you know what's also the crispy lavash, they told us this little thing. It's basically, they say the first lavash that you make in a tonnier is like your first love. So it lights up, it burns immediately. It's like it cooks super fast and then disintegrates and it's gone.
Too hot to last.
too hot to last. It's too hot to handle. So that's how they test the tonid. And then they told us this story, and we're like, yeah, that's pretty spot on, I would say. And then they fed it to us in the sandwich. So like crispy lavash, so good.
So one great thing about that bakery too was that it's some people in Yerevan love it so much that they will pay the bus driver fare to take up a seat on the bus. So a stack of the lavash will travel into Yerevan on the bus, and it just sits there, and the bus driver then drops it off at whoever wanted paid the fare.
We were there, and the owner of the bakery, she's like, she's walking out with a plastic bag of lavash. We're like, where are you going? She goes, I got to go put this in the bus. We're like, what? It's like Armenia Postmates, but like in a village. They just drop it.
Uber Eats.
Yeah, Uber Eats or something like that. And they just put it on the bus, and the bus driver, that's how nice people are in Armenia. I mean, the bus driver will take it to the middle of Yerevan to somebody and be like, here's your lavash.
And you talk in the book about seasonal lavash as well, and making lavash at certain times in the year and then storing it. And
yeah, so in the villages, what they do is they'll take, so we get lavash kind of in these plastic bags, right? And then if you guys have had lavash before, you store it, and in like 3 days, there's green stuff growing on it. In Armenia, what they do is they take the lavash and then they bake enough lavash to last through the winter. So villages will get together, and then all the villagers will come to one tonid. They'll make the lavash for their house, and then they'll go the next day to the other tonid in that house, and then basically they lay them all on the roof, the lavash, so they kind of dry out by the sun, and then they store them, and it almost comes like a crispy cracker. They store them in like one of the bedrooms in the house, and I mean, we've had photos of these piles of lavash. And then when you want to eat some fresh lavash through the winter, they take the lavash, they spritz it with a little bit of water, they wrap it in a towel, and in a couple minutes, it's soft, pliable again. It's pretty magical. If we had a room to store this, I would do that. But we kind of go through it so fast anyways, it stays soft in here.
It was pretty fun. I think the bedroom was right next to there was one kid's bedroom who was a Harry Potter fan. So you have stacks of lavash next to all these like Harry Potter sort of stories.
Like inscriptions.
Inscriptions on the wall. So that was kind of a neat juxtaposition. So, I mean, that was the thing. I mean, writing this book, and thank you so much for everyone who's listening to us today. I have to say, and Ara, I think you feel the same way, it was pretty much a once in a lifetime opportunity and adventure. Just the amount of hospitality that we experienced, and the people we met, and just the new way to think about food and how it fits into everyday life was just I don't think I'll ever experience something quite like that again.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, just times we were driving into Artsakh, we were on this 4-hour kind of stretch, and we kind of creeped right out of Armenia, and then we're stopping to stretch our legs next to this monument, and then there are 4 guys, young guys, probably in their early 20s, just sitting on top of the hill having a picnic. Yeah, and it was crazy. And we're like, okay, this is kind of strange. I mean, in LA, you never see just 4 guys having a picnic at the park. It just doesn't happen. And these guys were hanging out. They looked at us, and we're like a little posse at this point. One of my friends traveled with us. It's me, Kate, a translator, John, and we had it was 2 more students, I think, were with us at the time. So we had like a little posse, and they look over and they're like, hey, why don't you come over here and have some sandwiches with us? We're like, what? So we walk over, and they make us little sandwiches and then some homemade ori or vodka. You have to, I guess. And they're like, here you go. This is for you guys, and thanks for traveling the country. And then we have a shot. And then they're like, now you guys will come with us to our village, and we'll go and hang out. And we're like, we have to go to Artsakh because we have things to do. We have recipes to find. They're like, okay, one more shot just for you. And then it was like after 10, 15 minutes, we're like, we really have to go. And it's amazing, the hospitality. It's crazy. It truly is.
So now we're going to switch, speaking of Artsakh, one of our sort of, I think the Lavash-wrapped trout is definitely one of our favorites. Another one that's one of our favorites is Jingalov, just because it was a dish that, a flatbread filled with greens. And I'll just start showing you some of the greens. So the nice thing about this, so it's really part of Artsakh because so many different greens grow there. And it would be kind of crazy to try to replicate the greens that they grow there wherever you live. So I'm kind of showing you how you can get creative. So I've got some beet greens here. These were, I just trimmed them off beets. I was lucky enough to find some beets that had nice greens. These are actually turnip greens. I've got some, coriander, some dill, some green onion. And I also have a bunch of chard I've already kind of pre-chopped, just so you don't have to sit here and watch me chop a bowl full of greens. But one of the things that's pretty cool about the thing about when you're cooking food from Armenia or Artsakh, you're going to use a lot of greens, you're going to use a lot of herbs. But one of the things we learned was how to chop them fast and efficiently. So this was kind of a cool little lesson. I'll switch my camera back down. All right, so say I want some of this coriander, some of the beet greens, some of the turnip greens, some dill. I'm going to put them in a packet all together. Maybe trim off, if the ends are really, thick, you can trim them off, but you don't have to worry about it too much. I'm going to slice the bundle in the center, then I'm going to slide the cut ends all in one sort of bunch. So now you can see I'm not having to slice as much. I can kind of just all smash it into one pile and then just go. You can go slowly. You don't have to pretend you're on some cooking show. And just slice through the greens, stems and all, so you don't have to sit there, trying to carefully pick all the little, herbs off the stems. And now you have this beautiful kind of bunch of greens that's sliced efficiently. You still have these stems, and I do think with herbs, like the stems really do actually add some flavor too. So unless your parsley or dill has a very thick stem, I always use the stems. So now with Jingalov hots, you have this nice bunch of greens that you're going to fill into kind of just the simple dough that I was talking about earlier. So I'm just going to move my cutting board. All right. And then go back down so you can see. So I've made this dough before we started. And like I said earlier, it's a really simple recipe, just flour, water, salt. You can make it and it will be ready in say 20-25 minutes. You kind of just can store it in these little round balls and then start rolling it out. But while I'm doing that, I'll tell you a little bit about how we got our recipe. So the first time I went to Armenia was in 2017, and I had never had Jingalov hots before. But when we were in Yerevan, everyone we met said, oh, well, you've got to try Jingalov hots, but you have to get it in Artsakh. You have to go to Stepanakert, and if you go there, can you please bring us back some of these breads? And I'm thinking, why is this so special? And everyone we said, because they have the best greens, and it's just this local specialty that everyone there knows how to make. So then we get to Artsakh, and we meet the Minister of Culture there, who then tells us, yeah, it's, like the problem is people in Artsakh are starting to get a little lazy, and we used to use 25 greens. But now people are, maybe just using 20, and by the time my kids are making it, we're only going to be making, maybe they're going to be using 10 different herbs and greens. This made me really intimidated to try to make this dish at, home. So just so you know, I just added some oil, some salt, basically seasoning this almost like a salad because the greens go in raw and then they cook while you're making the bread. This is just some paprika. Pretty much similar spices to what Ara used. And then I have some lemon juice. So, but about the greens, I thought, well, how am I going to replicate a recipe with 25 different greens, some of which may not grow anywhere else in the world? The real truth of the matter is it's about getting a balance between the herbs, the herbal flavors, the dill and the parsley, cilantro. You could use tarragon, sorrel, chervil. It's getting that mix along with a neutral green, something like that could be like a Swiss chard if that's what you have, or a spinach, or and then you mix in maybe something that's a little more bitter. Maybe it's a watercress. Like I said, sorrel is a good one for that. And as long as you have a balance between I would say half of which is a neutral green, a quarter is like an herb of some sort, a mix of herbs, and a quarter is something a little sour. You'll have a good mix no matter what you have. So if you're trying to clean out the fridge, try making a, Jingalov hots.
It's literally every green you can find. So just whatever you got, you could just stuff it into this bread, and it is pretty magical. It doesn't seem at first glance, some people be like, I don't know if I want to have salad bread, but it's amazing. We always compare it to we say it's like a vegan quesadilla. And it's basically dough and every green packed into it. And it turns out incredible. And you're about to see how she shapes it, which is just an overbearing amount of greens.
Right. So, I mean, this is not a very big circle. I wrote the recipe so you can start getting comfortable with a smaller one. The women at the market, theirs is probably maybe double the size of this.
Yeah.
But this is a nice size to get sort of familiar with shaping, because you're pretty much thinking of this like a huge dumpling filled with greens. So again, here's my nice mix of greens. It's if I were in Armenia, they would probably have a lot of herbs. Ara, you remember some of the herbs like they all started with uk or
there's turtanjug, and there was one that in the translation is old man's belly button. There's another hard part about herb identification in Armenia is everything is thyme. So everything is urts. So like if you say, where is this? They go, this is urts from the mountains, and then this is urts from the flatland, and then this is wild urts. So we had like a pretty difficult time identifying a lot of the greens. One of the ones, the mountain urts, the mountain thyme, we finally figured out that it's actually, we were looking, like, no, this is sorrel, or sorry, savory. This is savory. And it was like, we spent a lot of time figuring out what things were actually called, or what we call them here in the States, because it was quite confusing. It's definitely challenging.
It's even the case between the UK and the US. I mean, we use cilantro instead of coriander. I mean,
coriander.
Herb identification, I think, across the world is just kind of going to be a challenge. So, worst case scenario, I mean, worst comes to worst, you taste it and you think, oh, I know what that reminds me of. And so that's kind of how we did a lot of our investigation. It's like, what is that? Summer savory. What is that? Oh, that's chervil. So, and then some of the things we're like, well, that's not something we're going to find, but I think if we use French sorrel, we can get close.
Exactly. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you just jam it full of greens, you're gonna be all right.
Right. Exactly. And you're going to get lots of vitamins that way. So I showed you a side angle. I don't know if you caught that. I can redo it, but I just wanted to show you that I have it's a lot of greens piled on top. So then I'm just going to pinch it in the center like that. And I'm going to crimp it close, like I said, like you can think of it as a dumpling, a pie, any kind of thing where any way you can get it sealed. It doesn't have to look perfect. And the great thing is when it griddles, it can look cool no matter how it looks. So it doesn't have to be a perfect looking flatbread. So this is what it looks like now. It's kind of puffy, like I said, like a kind of really chubby dumpling of some sort. I'm going to just dust the counter. All right, so now I'm going to take the side of my hand and just flatten the seam. Just flatten it all the way down. Make sure my hand's nice and dusted, and then just press it. I want this nice and flat. And if it's not quite flat enough, I'll just go back to my rolling pin and just roll it.
Kate?
Yeah.
How do you stop the air from bursting out of the parcel? Because when I made your recipe, I found as I squeezed it down, those big bubbles of air came up and made holes in the pastry, which then leaked green juice when I tried cooking.
That is actually, we should have put that a note in the recipe, because I notice right now I actually have, sorry I keep moving this camera back and forth, but I do have a little hole right there. And so what I'm going to try to do is I'm just going to pinch it and hope for the best. So sometimes a little juice leaks out, as long as it's not too big of the hole. It should be okay if a little juice leaks out. But I think it might have to do with You know, sometimes it's just a little luck. Sometimes it does burn, but usually, you know, I'll probably have a couple spots, but it will.
When you're doing the pinch part, you don't want to do a perfect seal all the way down. If you saw, she was kind of pinching and twisting, that way when you flatten it, air comes out and it doesn't burst out of the bottom. So when she did that kind of chop thing in the middle, most of the air comes out, and then you turn it over. If something opens up, you didn't do the dough right. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's everything's repairable, but that's why that seal along that top edge, it's kind of like this pinch and twist if you saw what she was doing.
Right. And actually that's, I see somebody in the chat just said it looks like a Cornish pasty, and I think that would be a good way to think of shaping it. The dough is maybe a little softer. I did make this, I made Jingalov hots using our lavash dough, and it's, no one would call it Jingalov hots, but I thought it was delicious. So if you want a little puffier of a bread that's maybe a little more forgiving with holes and things, you can use the lavash dough. But just if you put it on Instagram as Jingalov hots like I did that one time, I learned my lesson. It was too puffy. People knew right away.
People saw straight through the picture. It was crazy. They saw straight through the picture.
I'm just getting, I have an overturned wok right here that I'm going to use. You can use a cast iron pan or any kind of like griddle that you have. But this is what I use because I feel like it heats up really quickly and I can get it nice and hot so I can get that char.
So my trout is almost done. So while you lay that thing on there, I'm going to grab the trout, show you guys.
And Kate, we've had a question for you, a couple of questions. Do you use bread flour or all-purpose flour for the dough?
I use an all-purpose flour. Ooh, that looks nice, Ara.
I think it needs another minute or so.
I don't know how different all-purpose flour in the U.S. is compared with all-purpose what pastry flour is in the UK. I think bread flour might be a little too firm for this kind of dough because you do want it a little softer and more pliable. And a bread flour you could use, but you probably need to give the dough a little bit more resting time so it doesn't bounce back so much when you're rolling it out. As you saw, when I rolled it out pretty smoothly and easily, and it didn't fight with me too much. If the dough does fight with you, usually I just let it rest and come back to it in 5 minutes, and it rolls out much smoother. So, okay, see, I've got some steam happening here. All right.
I saw the question, can we bake it in the oven? Is that somebody just asked?
Yeah.
So you can do it in the oven. We've tried it in the oven. If you have like a pizza stone as well, you can do it on that in the oven. You do it in a sheet tray. The best results are kind of on what Kate's doing right now. So that emulates what's called a sage, and that's what they use. It's basically the same thing. It's just this cast iron or high carbon steel dome, and you slap it on that, and that kind of keeps it stretched out a little more. But you can do it in the oven. You can do it on like a flat griddle top, which I've done before, something like this. You know, it's pretty versatile.
Satanik asked, are you tempted to crumble cheese into it too? Is that sacrilege, or are there cheese Jingalov hats and pomegranate seeds and sometimes as well? What are the other things you add?
So pomegranate seeds is definitely something, and it's in our recipe in our book as optional because we were taught that. I do a lot of wild things with it. I'll crack an egg on top of it and eat it for breakfast, and it becomes like a kind of like a khachapuri, but it's incredible. I eat everything with hot sauce, so hot sauce on it. Don't do this stuff in Armenia though.
With a little bit of feta or any kind of Armenian cheese, it's really delicious. But yeah, we never saw anybody eat it that way in Artsakh or in Armenia.
So here we go.
And then what are you serving them with? Oh, look, there we go. Kate's. What are you serving the Jingalov hats with? Are you just eating them how they are, or are you
straight away?
Straight away.
Straight away, just like that. You put, some people offer, they go like some spicy pepper you can do on there, but you just eat it straight away like that. You can roll it, kind of eat it like that. You can cut it in pieces. It's like a appetizer or a dinner or kind of a breakfast. It's whatever you want, but you don't really serve it with anything. Yeah, red wine works. Red wine works really well. Red wine, beer, everything. It's pretty. It's like a fast way to jam yourself full of a bunch of greens. It's a great meal on the go. And like Kate said, everybody that travels down to Artsakh will, if it's a kid that's doing it, the parents will send money. They'll bring back. We had a couple kids in our car from Tumo that were doing our adventure with us, and they got a bunch of cash with them, and they brought back like 20 of them to their parents. We're like, what are you guys doing with all this? They're like, oh, we're taking it to our parents. We're like, what? It's like piles of them. So I'm just going to take, see that? Take that, and I'll show you. So here we go. I'm going to cut this thing open right now. So you guys see that right there? This is the best part, okay? So you take it, we'll use this one. We'll do this one so you guys can see better. So this is the head, my favorite. Was that?
Oh, that was me, yeah.
Okay, so you just cut straight down the center. You want to hear how good this is? You guys hear that crunch? And then you pull it open. And there it is. And basically the way you eat it, did I fall down a little bit here? Sorry, okay, here. Very tight, tighter there. Okay, sorry, messing around with my stand now. So basically from here, you bust it open, you have your butter in here, all nice. You can eat it with your hands, you can eat it with a fork. What I like to do is I just take a little piece like this with the lavash and all, and then up and away. That's fire. That's good. I like that. So there, it's super simple. There's a few ingredients. It's 4 ingredients. You put it together, 15 minutes. You have an awesome meal. Awesome meal. I think Kate has some Jingalov ready.
Yeah, I actually just pulled this off the griddle when Ara was diving into his trout. And so you can see I got nice char in a pretty short amount of time. This side as well. And you know, it doesn't have to be perfect to be pretty delicious. So just in case anyone wants to see it one more time, I have another round here that I can just do so you can watch the process. So again, I'm just gonna pinch it in the center. I can do it this way. That might be easier to see. And I'm going to just sort of tuck, like say if you're sealing a Cornish pasty, that's a great way to think about it. I actually I spent a year at the University of Exeter, so I had my fill of Cornish pasties. I probably lived on them for 9 months or so. All right, okay, so like I said, it doesn't have to be beautiful, but look, it's pretty tall, and then after I'm done with it, it's gonna be a lot flatter. So Ed, this is to your question. When I'm doing this, I'm also trying to get out some of that air. It's not always perfect, but you know, you do what you can. That's the nice thing about these doughs is that they're kind of just, if you've been on online a lot, this is the type of recipe that you can just really get your hands dirty and just play with dough, and it doesn't have to look perfect, but it's a great, you know, great sort of thing to try. And the more you do them, and the more, say, this is just a small batch of Jingalov pots if you wanted to make a lot of them and freeze them. I mean, by your 8th round, you're going to be really good. Not 8th round, but like your 8th go at it. So again, this is nice and flat. And I would just stick this on the griddle and do just what I did.
So we have had a question, Kate, you just mentioned freezing them there. We had a question from Martin and Paula about how you store them. Storing, in the book it says you can store them in the fridge for sort of 3 days, but you said freezing them. How do you sort of freeze and reheat them?
Right.
So I can answer that.
I was turning off my griddle.
So basically, if you take them and you lay them out parchment paper in between each one, and then you wrap them tightly in plastic, you just want them to lay flat after you cook them and freeze them, and then you can slack them out and just throw them on the griddle the same way. They freeze pretty well.
And you could also cook them all and then just freeze them, as long as you, as Ara said, you just have them nice and flat. So they're freezing flat in your freezer, and they're individually wrapped. So you could have a couple of them in one bag, but they won't be stuck together because they'll be individually wrapped, and they'll last for, I don't know, a good month. longer, because I did make
No,
some that
longer.
I thought about, and I think it was 6 months later when I ate them, and they were okay. You know, I probably did doctor it up with some cheese at that point, but you know, I didn't tell anybody.
Yeah, the wok is just upside down.
We've got a question about the wok being upside down. So that's upside down on a gas burner.
Yes.
I don't have gas in my flat, and when I made the recipe, I put a cast iron pot in the oven for 45 minutes to get it really hot.
There you go.
And brought it out and of that, which worked just fine.
That's a
yeah.
good idea. Yeah, I know that not everyone has. Yeah.
We have a question from Jennifer about the ratio of flour to water for the dough. I believe the recipe is now up on the Armenian Institute's website. So people can check out which I think we sent the link to earlier in this in the chat, so people can check there. And Hasmig has asked about baking them in the oven again, and Ara said that's okay, isn't it, Ara?
You can bake them in the oven.
Just make sure the oven is as hot as it will get before. And if you do bake it in the oven, what I would do is probably, like Ed was saying, he had a cast iron pan, he got really hot. I would put that cast iron pan in the oven, get it really hot. Then when you're ready to bake your Jingalov pots, put it on the already hot piece of cast iron. Because what you really want to do is, it's all about getting those blisters. So you'd obviously, you know, I have a, it's lucky that I have the setup I do with the gas burner. I know that it's not everyone doesn't have gas, and I don't even think in California they're getting away from having gas. So this might be the last time I have a gas burner. So I will probably be definitely experimenting with other things like that. But it's just like if you were to cook a pizza, you wouldn't want to put it on a cold pan in the oven. You'd want to heat that pan up really hot. So then when the pizza gets on there, it has that chance to just get those blisters and not have such a pale looking dough. And since this dough doesn't have any yeast, it really needs that heat to just make it kind of just come to life, I think.
You want those blisters. You got to have those blisters on there. Yeah. Or else it just kind of turns a little kind of palish. Those blisters really kind of bring it to life. Yeah. So you want that hot, high heat source.
One thing I want to add too is that we do have it's not in the cookbook, but it's in our a new project that we did about Artsakh, because I mean I know that all of you were devastated last year by the news, and so we were trying to figure out things on ways we could give back, because we did travel in Artsakh a couple of times and met people and learned how to make, you know, Jingalov pots, and we wanted to figure out a way to kind of give back. So we made I guess it's like an oversized magazine. It's called Artsakh. Ara, show the back.
Here's the front. It says Artsakh, and then in the back it says Artsakh. It's in Armenian. So you can get these. We have an Etsy link. So we kind of self-published this. We wanted, like Kate said, we wanted to give back. After the printing costs and everything, 100% of the proceeds going straight to Armenia. So we've kind of put this together because we were getting asked a lot. Like Kate said, people were saying, "Hey, what portion of the book is being donated? What are you guys doing to give back?" We've all done things individually to give back. The book, unfortunately, runs through the publisher and all these other things, so we can't get involved in that. So we kind of came out with our own publication just to give what we can straight back. And it's filled with a bunch of pictures. So our co-author, John Lee, who's not here, a time zone is a little weird with him because he's in Singapore. So he's the photographer, he did all the photography for the book. It's huge pictures, huge scapes. It's kind of just a lot of photos. And in the back of the book, there's recipes that are specific to Artsakh. So there's a handful of recipes that we found. Some of them are in the book, some of them are not.
All right.
But yeah, there's terturuk. And
so this one's actually a really cool recipe regarding Jingalov pots, because it's what you do when you have extra dough and you've run out of greens. So what you can do is you get a little bit of sugar and flour and oil. You make a paste, maybe add a little vanilla or something. And you
vanillin, you got to do vanillin.
Vanillin, right? Vanillin.
That's what they use in Armenia. Vanillin.
Vanillin. So what you do is you make this like sweet flatbread, and what they called it, a village Napoleon.
Basically, yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Because I think that's one of the tricky things, and just to get onto the details of Jingalov Hats, the bread itself, I think the recipe, reading any kind of flatbread recipe always seems a little bit more intimidating than I think actually when you get in there and get your hands dirty and just start trying to work your way through the recipe. These days, what I do is, as long as I aim for roughly 2 cups of greens per bread, I'm good. And I get that ratio of, half of it's going to be neutral greens, a quarter is going to be herbs, and a quarter is going to be something a little bit sour, a sour type of green. It gives a nice balance. So that's something that you can keep in mind, so you don't have to get to, I don't have 20 herbs, I'll never be able to make this bread. So that was definitely my early hang up, but now I'm over it, because it's just like, you can figure out what works by rummaging in your fridge and saving things like turnip tops and beet tops and things that might have not had a home otherwise. I think today I used some radish tops. I forgot to mention those.
Yeah, that's always a good one. That's always a good one.
Another tricky thing about the greens is sometimes when you mix them, you start adding that salt, you add that oil, that acid, and like a salad that sits too long, it starts to break down. And all of a sudden, the volume of greens you have has shrunk. So if you're going to, say, make a double batch from what we have in our cookbook, I would suggest mixing the greens in 2 parts, so that each time you're using greens that haven't quite wilted down, and that'll stop some of the moisture seepage that will happen if you're grilling. So that's another kind of tip. And then if your greens you don't have enough greens to fill all the Jingalov Hats, that's when you do the whole village Napoleon trick, and you get a little sugar, and I think they
vanilla. Vanilla. We'll use regular vanilla.
Vanillin. I'd probably be tempted to put some, I don't know, like citrus zest in there, maybe some cardamom, probably.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of fun you could do when you have
put cinnamon in there. You could do a lot.
Yeah. So that's a thing. Play around. It's dough, it's flour, water, salt. Those are inexpensive ingredients. The greens can be inexpensive, especially if you're trying to use up greens that are already in your fridge that you might have some guilt about because you haven't eaten them yet. It's worth giving it a try. But let me just show. I'm just going to slice into it.
Yes.
Moment of
truth. The best part.
Let's see. And voila. And so what I do is I just kind of fold it up like that. You can see that's a nice layer of greens, but the dough itself is pretty thin. And
yeah, there it is. Breakfast of champions, or dinner, I guess, for you guys.
Not too shabby.
Awesome.
So I think we flew through. I should have got some. I do have another Jingalov Hats. I can start firing that up on the, but you guys can't come over, so I feel.
You just got to eat it.
So would now be a good chance for people to ask questions if they have any questions.
Yeah.
One thing I'd really love to know. I've cooked quite a lot of recipes in the book. Please, if anyone has any questions, just bung them in the chat. I've cooked quite a few recipes in the book, and you talked a little bit about how you went about collecting recipes and how people were actually quite welcoming when you were asking them for their recipes. What was the hardest recipe to find? The one that you really had to dive deep to find? The
baklava was not easy.
Baklava was a tough one.
Matnakash, maybe.
Matnakash, we kind of circled so we took this long drive all around Armenia, and Matnakash was one of the last on the list. And I remember we were in Gyumri, and it was the last leg of our tour, and we were all kind of tired, and we're like, man, we don't have the Matnakash recipe yet. And we're kind of scrolling on the streets, and Gyumri is a kind of a crazy place. It's still suffering from things that happened in the earthquake there. It's really close to Georgia, but there's a lot of really, really cool recipes that came out of Gyumri because they have the mishmash through the border. And we went into this bakery just to get some matnakash, just because so they have all the bakeries are called dak hats, which just means hot bread. So like every bakery is just hot bread. That's it. That's a sign. There's no name. I'm sure they have names, but it just says Dakhats. And we walked in, so we were like, hey, we want, we were wondering, we're doing this book, can we get your matnakash recipe? And they were like, yeah, come on in. And we just straight to the back. I mean, this is a full functioning bakery that's pumping out, a massive amount. It's not like a lady that's just teaching us. And they brought us into the back, and they were kneading the dough, they were getting it, but everything they were doing where they're like, 10 kilos of flour, and we're like, shit. What do we do?
Right. The thing about that one too was that we walked in and they're really busy, and you can't always get a sense of whether they want to talk to you. So it was one of those maybe we shouldn't ask because we feel like we're intruding. And then they just really got into it. One of the women who worked behind the counter, she ran down the street, went to her home, brought back her best coffee, cups to serve us, because she felt like, we're guests at the bakery and we need like some decent sort of cups to serve source. So that was just, it was kind of like, no, it's fine. Like but it was a wonderful experience. And I remember the baker, and his name is in the head note of for that recipe that we have in the book. And we asked, is it hard to learn how to make matnakash? And he just had such a deadpan, and Gyumri just has the best, I think, deadpan kind of humor in probably all of Armenia. But he said, if man can land on the moon, I think we can figure out how to make matnakash.
Yeah, they were so hospitable. It was kind of crazy. And then we ended up spending, I feel like it was like hours there, and we were like learning and doing all our things. And then we're like, you know what? They're not going to, take money from us. We should just buy what we can. So we're like, we bought an abundance of bread. We're like, we'll take the matnakash, we'll take whatever those are, we just wanted to buy it. We're like, road trip, we're going to be fine. And then they were like, okay, it's $3. And we're like, no, it has to be more. So we ended up kind of gathering ourselves together. We're like, we have to give them something more. We needed this recipe. So we put a bunch of money underneath the coffee that they gave us, and kind of were like as like a tip. And we're like, we're just going to put money under the coffee, and everyone, come on, let's go. All right, bye, thank you. And we're about halfway down the block, and the lady comes running after us with the money in her hand. She's like, no,
you forgot your money.
No, you forgot your money. And then we're like, no, it's for you. And she's like, amote, which means like, it's rude, you can't. And we're like, okay, we're so sorry. Like, she's like, you know what, next time just come back. We're like, deal. So that's kind of, that's,
I think that's actually a really good point, because I've heard this question from other people who write cookbooks where you're going to somebody else's country and you're kind of relying on the help of people to get you the information you need. There sometimes can be like an ethical question of what do they get out in return. And I know for some people who, if they're going to a certain country, they anticipate that they're going to pay the people who are teaching them how to make a certain recipe, because they're almost like, it's like a teacher-student kind of relationship, and they want to make it so it's not like, I'm just not taking your information and making it my own. We couldn't do that in Armenia. I mean, if we spent pretty much an all afternoon in one woman's apartment in Goris, which is where we learned how to make baklava. And I think we just made sure we brought a nice couple of hostess gifts, and we bought the ingredients, but she was, you just can't, it's just not in their nature.
Not the same. It's
like,
not that.
This is about sharing culture, and it's not about, they don't want it to have that kind of, a relationship where it's not a commercial transaction. And I don't know if that's kind of stems from Soviet era, or if it's just part of just hospitality.
I did have the opportunity. So after the book was printed, I knew that we couldn't give them anything. They wouldn't accept anything. So I planned another trip out to Armenia with our first box of books that we got, and went around to everybody that helped us and gave them a copy of the book. I know it's especially the price point for the book is a little expensive for the little rural villages in Armenia. And so it was our opportunity to try to give back. I took pictures with them, showed them their recipe. Some of them have their pictures, their hands in it. There's people in it. So everyone was super, super excited about it. I think at first they really didn't grasp the concept of what was happening. I mean, you have me, who's kind of like, I'm Armenian. My Armenian isn't the best Armenian, but I got by. We have Kate.
No, Ara, you're a sportsman, right?
I'm everywhere I went, like the way I dressed, they're like sportsman. They thought everywhere I played, you play football, and I was like, no, I cook, but I can run. But I mean, we have John Lee, who's Taiwanese American. We have Kate, who's Irish American, and then there's me, who like I talk and act like a person straight from Los Angeles. We were like an alien pack, and we're like, can we have your recipes? And they're like, we don't really know what's happening. And then when they saw the book, they were like, oh, whoa, this is amazing. You know, it kind of all came full circle. So it was a great experience.
We've a few more questions coming through. One from Olivia from earlier about whether Jingalov hats are best eaten hot or cold. It sounds like straight off the pan and into your mouth is the best way to eat Jingalov.
You cannot beat it.
I mean, it'll be fine at room temperature. If it's cold, I'll just warm it up a little bit, either on a griddle or in an oven or just something to take the chill off. But
room temp or hot off the griddle.
We had another question from Kath, which was about, Kath asked, did you find recipes that had been handed down through families that you hadn't heard about before going to Armenia? Because you guys talk about, in your research and your prep for the trip, you wrote out a kind of hit list of recipes that you wanted to find people to tell you about. But when you got there, were there recipes that you weren't expecting? So
our hit list was way off. It was like, I don't even know if we got, like, I would say maybe 10% of our hit list was what actually made it to the book. So a lot of them were dishes that I grew up with that I thought were Armenian and Kate knew. And then John did a food photography workshop for Tumo. So he had photos of all this food and he was like, I need to know what this is. I need to know what this is. And we want to get this. And I didn't know it. We would show it to certain people. They didn't know it.
Wait, all right. You have to talk about the famous, the dish that John had told us. He's like, I think they take strips of lavash and put it in boiling water and add cheese. And we thought,
John was like, I had this dish. He had photographs of it, and he's like, it's called bana. He didn't have the name actually, but he's like, it's cheese and water and lavash. And I was like, that sounds disgusting. I don't want any part of it. We'll find it eventually, but I don't want any part of this. And then we kind of made our way through, and that became like the dark horse. That's the recipe I make more often than anything else. We hang out with our friends. End of the night, it's called banarkhash. And basically it's Armenian mac and cheese. You take onions, cut them up, caramelize them, or saute them with some butter. Then you take lavash and you just chunk it up with string cheese. And you basically just take lavash, string cheese, lavash, string cheese, lavash, string cheese. You put the caramelized onions and butter and you pour hot water into it. You stick it in the oven at around 400, 450. When you pull it out, it's the cheese and water melted together to make a cheese sauce. And you're just eating it's like mac and cheese. It's insane. And it was one of the dishes that I was like, gross the whole way. John kept talking about it. I was like, it's not happening. And then now it's probably the dish I make the most at home. It's insane.
It was one of those things where people we asked in Armenia didn't know the dish unless they were from Gyumri. So that was one thing. So it wasn't necessarily a recipe that had been handed down from families, but we did find very dishes that were specific to a region, and then everybody in that area knew that.
This dish, you wouldn't go to a restaurant and say, give me an order of banarkhash. Like when we told them we want banarkhash recipe, they're like, why? My grandma used to make me that. That's not like a dish that you want to flaunt, because it's kind of, they didn't have money. They had some lavash and some cheese, and then it's a filling meal, I'll tell you that. So we did find a lot of kind of small, quirky recipes along the Gyumri. We found marinated trout, which is incredible. It's kind of like escabeche. It's like a ceviche. It's kind of nuts, and you just basically take trout. You mix it with some allspice berries and some carrots, some onions, and you just let it rest in some apple cider vinegar. And then it's like Armenian ceviche. It's kind of nuts. So there's a lot of like recipes that they make throughout, and a lot of regions kind of came up with their own, it's like sub cuisines throughout the regions of Armenia. Goris beans, for example, the lady that taught us the baklava recipe, we left there. Goris is region closest probably to Artsakh, and they're famous for their beans. So if you go or you hear talk about Goris, someone goes Goris beans, and they're kind of like cranberry beans or golati beans. And this lady, we went to her house and she made us 7 or 8 different bean dishes. There was a bean soup, bean pate. She ground up beans with walnuts and turned it into like this slicing dish. She made the bean triangles, which is in the book. The bean triangles are phenomenal. Lavash with like almost bean spread inside, and you roll it into like a football and fry it. It looks like a bean samosa. And needless to say, I mean, after hours of bean eating, the car ride was very serious.
Oh man, that's the truth. 203, page 203 is where you can find the
Manakash
recipe.
And we've got some more questions coming through again about Jingalov hats and the herbs that are being used in Jingalov hats. Olivia asked, do you think the greens used in Jingalov hats will be directly affected by the outcome of the war? And so the relocation of people and their access to those herbs and the specific herbs that are being used in Jingalov hats.
My guess is what. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh,
yeah, one question. Sorry, and I was going to say also, Nick asked about focus on herbs and the lack of spices and lemons. Do you think it was out of necessity, the fact of being separated from parts of the region that produce these things, both in the Soviet period and today, or was the cuisine in this part of the highlands like this for as long as anyone could remember?
I think it's really when it comes to first on the Jingalov hots and the herbs, I have a feeling that when people were relocating, they were taking plants with them so they could replant. And I'm not 100% sure on that, but I do know that now there are women making Jingalov hots in Yerevan, Dilijan, in different places, and sort of like in a not in a refugee sort, but like, hey, this is something that's very special. And I think one of the things that I should have mentioned earlier about Jingalov pots is it's really, I mean, this is culture that we can save. We can keep this culture alive by making this bread. And I think now it's becoming more known. I mean, everyone in Armenia loves this bread now, and now it's spread to California. So I think the women now who are the pros at making this from Artsakh are getting a lot of recognition, and I hope that they also are able to keep some of those seeds that and wild herbs maybe that they can kind of repopulate and spread to the fields of Dilijan. But on the point about the Soviet time and the differences in flavors, I do think actually Soviet. There is a great book called "Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking." It's really, really funny read and look at Soviet times, because there was huge amounts of change in how Armenians ate because of the Soviet Union. So much so that if you go to lavashthebook.com, we have a resources page, and there is a link to a research article or a research public journal that writes about how lavash is connected to Armenian heritage from the west and the east side. And what happened during Soviet times is the Soviets wanted people to eat different types of bread, but Armenians still would make lavash, even though the Soviets were trying to get them to make more Russian-style breads. So I think that's also a really interesting aspect of the Soviet Union. I mean, if you go to a grocery store in Yerevan, I made the mistake of thinking that something was yogurt and it was sour cream. There's a lot of Soviet that ended up becoming common dishes, and one of them we have in the book is salat vinaigrette, which is a chopped. You get beans, beets, pickles, herbs. It doesn't have mayonnaise. All right, I know you're not a fan of mayonnaise, so but there's definitely that. And I think also there was already the divide happening before Soviet times, because Armenia is in the mountains. It's not an easy place to grow lemons. We did see a lemon tree in Artsakh, but a lot of times in the market in Stepanakert for acid, if the herbs that they were using in Jingalov pots didn't have enough like sour flavor, they would sprinkle a little citric acid on top.
That too, yeah.
they didn't have. We can use lemon juice. That's what I use today, but they would not use probably lemon juice that often.
We've got a few more questions popping into the chat now. It's just Tatovik has just posted about Zanazam, which is the Armenian Institute's new magazine, and I know that the Jingalov hats recipe, your Jingalov hats recipe, actually features in there alongside some stories from Artsakhi women who are now selling Jingalov hats in Yerevan, and Tatovik has just put the link up there. So,
awesome.
Go
Awesome.
look at that. I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. Susan, wave at me if that's a yes. That's probably a yes. Great.
Yes.
We've had a couple of questions about cheese, actually.
Good one.
Someone has asked, what type of cheeses did you find in Armenia?
So cheese in Armenia is a lot like wine in Europe. It's not defined by the type of cheese. It's defined by the region. So one of the most famous cheeses is Lori cheese from the Lori region. And it's very specific. It's just, you don't have like feta or string cheese or this. It's basically, they'll tell you what cheese that region makes. Lori being one of the most popular, we went to a Lori dairy farm, not a dairy farmer, a cheese maker, and had a pretty amazing experience with him at like 7 in the morning. He showed us how he processes his cheese. I have to say he does it in a very small kind of, it's like a concrete barn almost. And it's him and his mom and his dad used to make it. And I don't know how old they were, but walking into it, you can feel the microbiomes, like the probiotics hitting you. And these two people he was probably late 50s and she was probably in her 70s, but they had skin that was like so clean and it was glowing. It was insane. It was nuts. And then he fed us hunks of cheese and shots of vodka, which is
there was a couple of the cheeses that we saw, like for the Banarkash. One of the cheeses that they used was that sort of string cheese that sort of has the mold on it.
It's like blue cheese. It's called chana. Man, I'm brain farting right now. I
can't remember what it's called either.
I forget, but it's like string cheese, but not the string cheese. I don't know what you guys have in the UK, but we have it usually comes in kind of like this knot, the type of string cheese, and sometimes it has like the black seeds in it. So they don't have that in Armenia. The string cheese, when they use it, it's very, very stringy, and it has like traces of glue in it. So it's kind of like blue cheese. And most of the cheese in Armenia is extremely salty. That's one of the things. It's a thing for preservation. So a lot of this stuff isn't like, it's not heavily refrigerated. Same with like basturma. It's all, if you look at a lot of the food in Armenian culture, it's made to travel and it's made to store. So there's a lot of preservation. They jar, they jam, they can, they brew their own liquor. Lavash, it's meant to store. Basturma, if you guys aren't familiar with it, is just a hunk of meat that you just dump a bunch of salt on, all the water comes out, and you hang it for like a week or so. We have a recipe in the book for it. It's phenomenal, but it's salty and it lasts for a long time. And all of the foods, there is a dish called, or it's not a dish, more like an appetizer called gahurma. Gahurma is literally meat that is just cooked with like a fat cap layer on top, and it's jarred.
In clarified butter. It's
clarified butter.
In clarified butter.
So yeah.
A couple more questions coming through. One about a couple about the book. Again, a question about that Armenian macaroni cheese. That recipe that's in the book, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely in the book. I think Kate said
203 or 202, something like that.
203.
And we've had a question about non-print formats for the book. Is it only available in paperback, or can you get it on Kindle?
I think there is a Kindle version. There is a Kindle where you have to go through Amazon for that, but there is a Kindle version.
At least in the US there is. I don't know if that changes in the UK
yeah.
or not.
And someone else has asked a question about that delicious sounding potato sandwich that you talked about earlier. In the UK, we have what we call a chip butty, which is a sandwich with French fries in it.
Yes.
Do you have any more details about the Armenian chip butty? Were they fried potatoes? Were they with onions?
Boiled.
Crazy thing about it.
Just boiled potatoes.
Boiled potato and bread, and that's not the headline, right? The headline is like, it was delicious. But what you could do is, it just was so good on its own, but it would also be, of course, amazing if you wanted to put a pickle in there.
The pickles are key.
Spicy pickle.
Yeah.
It also would probably be great with some melted butter, not gonna lie. So, or some
some lori cheese, that salty cheese would be awesome inside of it. There were so many things you could do to it, but we didn't need to do anything because I don't know where it was, the potato from the gods, and like it was buttery, but there wasn't really butter on it. It was just boiled perfectly. The lavash was perfect. The air was probably the right barometric pressure. I have no idea, but it was incredible.
You might have been really hungry. I don't know.
We've got just two more questions. Well, actually, it's one more question. Satanik has asked this question a couple of times, but I was waiting until the end to ask it, Satanik, so apologies for not asking it already. But Satanik asks, after all of the traveling and tasting of food across Armenia, how would the two of you define Armenian food? Where does it fall and what is it about? If you were to describe it to a non-Armenian, what would you say is Armenian food?
I would say Armenian food Armenian food from Armenia is not what you would expect. It's a massive influx of herbs, grains, greens. It's not a meat-heavy country, even though there are a lot of meat dishes. So it's a lot of food that travels in stores well, and it's for. You know what? It's kind of hard to identify because a lot of people say like it's Middle Eastern or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it's if you look at where Armenia is, it's really at the base where a lot of food traditions came from. So it's really a kind of foundational food culture. And if you look at, say, lavash, could that be the precursor of pizza? Maybe. I mean, you're talking about very fundamental foods: flour, water, salt if you're lucky, herbs. And you can make it. What was really surprising to me is how much you can make out of not very much. So like Armenian food is really just like it's taking the best ingredients but not very many. And I know the Italians have been saying that for years, but it's really, really true in Armenia.
It's about sharing. It's about big spreads. It's about every table spread in Armenia, no matter what it is. You'll have. It's not just you get a dish. This is the dish that everyone's going to eat. We have greens, we have cheese, we have lavash, we have different spreads going on, and everything is accompaniment of something else, but everything is extremely simple. And they find cool new ways to make grains awesome. You know what I mean? There's heavy porridges, and then there's porridge almost using the same ingredients that's completely different with like the addition of maybe some fried onions and some yogurts. So it's a lot more. As a Western Armenian, you would say kebab and grilling meats and meat heavy and all this stuff. But in Armenia, there is that. Don't get me wrong. Khorovads is a big thing. But every table and every meal at every household isn't eating meat every day. So it's a mixture, and we try to highlight that in our book as much as we can, so people know, you're just not kebab,
Thank you very much. Those are great answers. I feel like it's also worth saying that for me, Armenian food and Armenian recipes are about keeping tradition alive and meeting people and connecting. And it's been so wonderful hearing from the two of you today, but also reading your book and connecting up with other Armenians through food. It's been really, really special. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for everyone that tuned in.
Thank you, and we'll hand to Susan to do a proper wrap up for us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, and there's so many. There's so much praise in the chat line. If you have a chance to look at it, we'll send it to you also.
Awesome, thank you.
And Ed, you too. You just disappeared, but you were great too. Gone. That was super, and I'm amazed at how quickly you just ran through these fabulous recipes and they were ready to eat already. So I think that's a good message to everybody. Don't worry about it taking too much time. Obviously, these guys can talk and do it in 15 minutes. We can really focus and do it in 20 minutes. So that's really great. And as I said earlier, I've tried a couple of the recipes, and they are very clear, really easy to follow, and delicious. So I really recommend the book, which is much more than a cookbook. Much more than a cookbook. I think we've said that, but they tell their stories and they talk about Armenia throughout, and Artsakh, of course. I just wanted to say, I was reminded of when Levon and I would visit Armenia in the early 90s, and everything was really, very difficult times. And yet you'd go to the poorest of households. I was doing a bit of field work then, and people would do exactly as you say and put a spread out. And and while you feel embarrassed to take their food and what they're going to eat the next day, but for them, and this is true all over the world, hospitality is reciprocal. It's a matter of being proud, sharing, showing what you do best, what you do well. And I think there's something to that, being able to show people we may be poor, but we know how to cook, and we are able to share, and we know what makes a good moral person, sharing. And it doesn't matter if we don't eat much tomorrow, but this is real. It's one of their highest values. You'll also find good hospitality in the Middle East as well.
It's true. It's true.
It is an Armenian thing everywhere you go. One more thing about the bread. Also, at the same time, people would complain to us that there's no bread. How can you have a meal without bread? And we'd look around, and there was these sort of Russian style bulky things everywhere, really. And we'd say, isn't that bread? I think, no, you're crazy. That's not bread. I have a meal with that stuff. That
amazing.
It was all new to me, that's for sure. So you really have touched all of us, I think, both of you, and the book. Ed, thanks again to you two for doing such a good job hosting. And I hope that we'll be able to see you again sometime. These were
for sure. Why not?
We would love to have you back.
Why not?
Why not? It was so fun. Yeah, it was
great. This was great.
Well, and I think it's unanimous in chat line. This was fabulous. I want to point out to everybody, we do have more events coming. This is a super fun event. We have our events are varied. They're usually very enjoyable. I know about this kind of fun, but they're always interesting, very enjoyable. And our next one is going to be with our Dr. Gagik Stepan Sarkisyan, our librarian, who will be talking about our quarterly book on display, which is going to be about Armenians in Smyrna. That will be 7:30 on April 8th. And could I just remind everybody that we also have an ongoing online fundraiser for our library, because we want to make our library, our books all cataloged and have that available online. So while we are going to be welcoming people to the library sometime, they also will be able to access things online. And Nick has just put that up in the chat line.
Sweet.
Also, just to mention, we have podcasts beginning with Olivia Melkonyan running those for us. We've just started, also called Zanazan, but Zanazan Sounds. And latest one was with Nick, talking with Özlem, have her name, Özlem, oh, for goodness sake, I just wrote it down. Özlem Belkim Galip, talking about Kurdish and Armenian literature. So that should be very interesting. Earlier one was with Mara Matosyan of the Women's Support Center in Yerevan, with Olivia herself. Also in the chat line, you'll find a questionnaire that we are sending out to everybody on our email list, asking you for how can we improve. I'm probably going to say now more Lavash events, but tell us about how we can improve. What can we do better? What do you like that we're doing, and what do you think, how can we improve? So please take a look at that, and it only takes about 10 minutes to fill out. It's not long. And I believe Nick has already sent a feedback form for this event. It helps us with our funding. If you could please fill that out. And again, tell us what you think we can do better as well as what you liked. So that's my long-winded thank you. Check the chat line. But one more time, Kate and Ara, that was fantastic. And we do look forward to seeing you again and going back to the cookbook tomorrow to make some more things.
Yay.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
To everybody who came tonight. And we'll see you all again soon.
We'll see you soon.
Bye. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.